folksy friend, and on this channel I talk Tolkien lore. If you are interested in folktales like fairy tales, beliefs, and mythologies, please take a look at my channel, Folksy Tales. On this channel I am trying to post at least once a week, sometime between Tuesday and Thursday. I will do my best to keep to that. Today we are talking about roughly the first 300 years of Middle-earth history, from the point of the council at Mithrim to the point that the elves meet the first men. So the background for today: the Noldor, who are a group of elves that once lived in the blessed realm of Valinor with the Valar, are in exile and have come over to Middle-earth and settled in Beleriand. If you want a full detailed overview of who lives where exactly in this western part of Middle-earth, please take a look at my video. I've got it linked above, or I'm not sure, my camera is going to show it backwards, but it's up there. For just a quick overview of what you need to know, the Noldor are still ruled over by the House of Finwë, who is their very first High King. The Great Lords of the house currently are Fingolfin, who is their current High King, his eldest son, and his nephews Maedhros, well, Maedhros is his half-nephew, and then his full-blooded nephew Finrod. Maedhros was the son of Feanor, who is the whole reason that these elves are back in Middle-earth. Long story there. And Finrod is the eldest son of Fingolfin's brother, Finarfin, who chose to remain behind in Valinor. So essentially we have the only remaining son of the first High King is now the High King, and then the eldest sons of each branch of the family are also considered High Lords. Fingolfin's people are the strongest and most feared by Morgoth and his forces, but Maedhros is the one keeping the most careful watch over Angband and any potential threat that Morgoth may cause. He is the one that wants to bear the brunt of any future attacks, partially because his father is the reason everybody is here and in danger, and also because the sons of Feanor took part in a great betrayal of the rest of the Noldor. The sons of Feanor, with their father and a very small group of elves, left everyone else behind in Aman and sailed over on ships that they then burned, causing everyone else to have to take a very dangerous path through the Helcaraxe, which caused them immense suffering and many deaths. So there's a truce between the sons of Feanor and everybody else in the Noldor, but the relationship is still on pretty rocky ground. Maedhros did want to keep his brothers away from everybody, for the most part, because a lot of them have a little too much of their dad in their personality, in the sense that they're a little too volatile and quick to anger, and Maedhros does not want any future scuffles to come up. So they mostly stay in the northeast, whereas everybody else is in the further west of this area in Middle-earth. However, Maedhros himself would actually go over to Fingolfin and Finrod's sides, and from time to time they would talk and strategize. They were okay. It was mainly the younger brothers on the side of Feanor's sons that were a little spicy, in particular Caranthir. And he is the only brother besides Maedhros, kind of in this time in history, who has a big impact on Beleriand. This is because Caranthir and the people following him went the furthest east of any of the brothers. They actually went right up to the mountains and settled at Lake Helivorn, which was right under Mount Rerir. Every time it's going to be a struggle for me, that one. Rerir. The people climbed up Ered Luin, and from there they could see the vast plains and just the extended landscape out to the east, and they were just amazed by the openness and the freedom of Middle-earth. Because they were this far up against the mountains, Caranthir and his people actually came across the dwarves. The dwarves who had locked themselves kind of in their mountain homes since Morgoth started to launch attacks against the elves. The dwarves would come out and kind of kill any orcs that were in their area, but for the most part they had retreated. They had stopped all trade and they were just living in their cities of Belegost and Nargothrond. And Caranthir and his people did not have the best relationship with the dwarves. Though either people loved skill and were eager to learn, no love was there between them. For the dwarves were secret and quick to resentment, and Caranthir was haughty and scarce concealed his scorn for the unloveliness of the Naugrim, and his people followed their lord. Sierra, if you're watching, and any other people out there who really love the dwarves, that's just another point against the elves for you, that high and mighty attitude. However, despite the dwarves' mistrust of the Noldor, and despite Caranthir's arrogance, they both hated Morgoth more than they disliked each other, so they made an alliance. Caranthir was actually one of his father Feanor's best pupils, and we know that Feanor is the greatest smith of any of the elves to ever exist. So Caranthir himself was highly skilled in crafting, as were many of the Noldor. So Caranthir and his people collaborated with the dwarves, and the dwarves of Belegost and Nargothrond became the most skilled of any of the craftsmen in any of the dwarven kingdoms. Then when trade resumed in Beleriand, because Caranthir controlled the area just outside the mountains, all of the trade went through him. So both sides essentially prospered and became very, very rich. So with the stage set, the first event that we have is 20 years after the first rising of the sun. Fingolfin, the High King of the Noldor, calls for a great feast among his people right by the pools of Ivrin and invites everybody. The land in this area was stunningly beautiful, and the feast was called Merith Aderthad, the Feast of Reuniting. In attendance were, of course, Fingolfin and Fingon and all of their people. Also, Maedhros and Maglor, the eldest two of the sons of Feanor, joined with their warriors from the marches. The Grey Elves also attended, those who were along the coast, as well as many elves throughout Beleriand, part of the Sindar, or the Grey Elves, ruled over by Thingol. The Green Elves from Osiriand also came. These are the Lequendi. They were descended from a group that fought and died in the first of the battles of Beleriand, and had become so traumatized from this that they were now essentially pacifists, and they lived in the woods of... That was my cat leaving the room, not a ghost. So they lived in the forests around Osiriand. They also attended, and then from Doriath, where King Thingol, who was the only ruler of Beleriand until all the Noldor showed up, he did not attend, but he did send 2 messengers with his greetings. During this feast, there were talks, collaborations, promises of friendship and fealty, and it was all over just a very good time of reconciling and joining and communication. They mostly spoke Sindarin, which is the language that the people of Middle-earth spoke. The Noldor, who again came from Valinor, still spoke the ancient language of Quenya, which was the very first elven language, but that was much harder to learn than Sindarin. Sindarin had developed thousands of years ago from Quenya, and now is an entirely different language. Many of the Noldor that were in attendance here actually thought and communicated about the fact that Feanor may have been right about the beauty and freedom of Middle-earth. They were still not happy with him, and probably not his sons, because of many things, including the kinslaying, the Helcaraxe, the fact that he got himself killed in 2.5 seconds. There's a lot of background here, but one of the things that he had said to lead his people to Middle-earth was that there would be freedom and beauty and open lands to rule. And in that regard, he was correct. After this feast, we have another 30 years before the next major event that takes place in Middle-earth. At this point, Turgon, who is the second son of Fingolfin, journeys to find his very close friend, Finrod, again, who is the eldest son of Finarfin and who rules over that side of the family. And at this point, Finrod was staying on Tol Sirion, which is an island in the mighty river Sirion. As a duo, they decided to travel south because they had gotten a little tired of the gloomy, cold northern mountains. So they just went on a little, friendship journey south. And at one point, they came across the Meres of Twilight and decided to sleep right up on the beautiful riverbank. This night, Ulmo, who is the Valar of Deep Waters, and really one of the only Valar to be taking an interest in Middle-earth at this time, comes up the river and puts an enchantment over the pair of them, causing them to go into a deep sleep that is filled with terrible prophetic dreams. They both awoke with this fear and deep kind of anxiety and concern that something bad was about to happen, but they did not tell each other what they felt because they thought, oh, there's no way we had the same dreams. So they parted ways, both with this feeling of impending doom, but not communicating that feeling to the other. At this time, Finrod and his sister Galadriel were guests of King Thingol in Doriath. And this side of the family were the only ones that were allowed in Doriath because they were technically Thingol's grandniece and nephew. Thingol's brother was their grandfather. Finrod saw the beauty, the majesty, and the strength of Menegroth, which is the home of Thingol, his wife Melian, and their daughter. And he wanted to try to replicate this. He wanted his own kind of underground fortress that was as magnificent as Menegroth because of this feeling that he had from Ulmo, that he needed somewhere safe because something bad was going to happen. And so he confided in Thingol. He told Thingol that he had these dreams and that he didn't know what they meant, but that he felt like he needed to create his own safe haven and that he just wanted somewhere like Menegroth. So Thingol tells Finrod that there is actually a gorge beneath the river Narog that would be perfect for setting up his own kind of fortress area. And Thingol goes one step further by having some of his people show Finrod exactly where it was. So Finrod came to the caves of Nagrod and using Menegroth as inspiration, created the mansions called Nargothrond. Just like they helped with Menegroth, the dwarves also helped build Nargothrond. They helped and worked side by side with the elves to delve out the caves and build the mansions of Finrod. They were then paid with Noldoran gems brought from Valinor because, interestingly, Finrod had the most wealth of any of the Noldoran princes. He brought with him the most gems and the most resources, so he was able to pay the dwarves handsomely for their work. With some of these gems, the dwarves also created Nauglamir, called the Necklace of the Dwarves. This was a necklace that was inlaid with countless precious stones, but had a special magic quality to it that despite how many gems there were, it was as light as flax and would always sit upon the wearer, making them appear to be full of grace and loveliness. After this collaboration of the Building of Nargothrond, the dwarves give Finrod the name, the epitaph, Felagund, meaning hewer of caves. And this became part of his name for the rest of his life. He was known as Finrod Felagund. At the time of the building of Nargothrond, Galadriel remained behind in Doriath because she had met a kinsman, family member of Thingol named Celeborn, and there was great love between them. She also became very close with Queen Melian, who was Thingol's wife, and learned a lot about the lore and the history of the land of Middle-earth. Because again, remember, she was born and raised in Valinor. At this time, they don't know all that much about Middle-earth. And so Galadriel becomes one of the wisest among them about Middle-earth. Now, Turgon also wanted to create his safe place, but in his mind's eye, he could only really think of the majesty of their city upon the hill back home in Valinor, the city of Tirion upon the hill Tuna. And that is what he wanted. He did not want to build a home of caves and tunnels. He wanted a great city upon a hill. But no matter where he wandered, he just couldn't find the right spot. So he returned to Nevrast and stayed at Vinyamar near the sea, just thinking. After a year of this contemplation, he's actually visited by Ulmo himself. Ulmo tells Turgon to go into the Vale of Sirion and to follow his directions, which he does. There he comes across the hidden Vale of Tumladen, in the encircling mountains, completely hidden, and in this vale there is a great hill of stone. Turgon told no one about this discovery, but he went about planning a great city to one day build in this hidden place. Now, around this time, Morgoth's spies, for he had many, were watching the Noldor, and they reported to him that the Noldor were just wandering around in peace and that they were not really preparing for any kind of battle. And so, Morgoth decided it was time to launch an attack. Once more, with little warning, his might was stirred, and suddenly there were earthquakes in the north, and fire came from fissures in the earth, and the iron mountains vomited flame, and orcs poured forth across the plain of Ardgalen. The orcs went down the pass of Sirion, straight through the lands of Maglor, but Fingolfin and Maedhros were prepared. They attacked Morgoth's forces from either side as they went into Dorthonion, and they killed every last orc, following them right back to the very gates of Angband, making sure that not a single one of them made it back. This was known as the third of the Wars of Beleriand and called Dagor Aglareb, the Glorious Battle. Now, the Noldor saw this as a serious warning sign that Morgoth was nowhere near done with them, and they decided to strengthen their defenses and prepare for future attack. They set a siege upon Angband itself, ensuring that Morgoth could never again try to surprise them. Whatever he did, they would see. The siege would last 400 years, but would never truly be successful because no matter what they did, they could not surround Angband entirely to cut it off, nor could they get in through the gate. Behind Angband was Thangorodrim, the three mighty peaks in the Iron Mountains that protected it from behind, so they could only form a circle around the gates themselves. And so Morgoth would just send his spies out the back and send them through and around the Iron Mountains to come into Beleriand and continue to do their work. They brought him back not only information, but also prisoners, elves that he could terrorize into basically flipping to his service. Elves that just from the look in his eyes would become so terrified that without even realizing, from that day forward, they would do his work. And from this, Morgoth learned a lot about the Noldor. He learned everything that had happened in their ranks, including the betrayals, the backstabbing, the animosity, and he was delighted to know that there was so much derision among his enemies. Almost 100 years after Dagor Aglareb, Morgoth was focused on trying to catch Fingolfin and his side unawares. He knew that Maedhros was always watching, and he did not want to try going through the marches again. So Morgoth sent his forces north and then west and back south again, following essentially the same route that Fingolfin and his people had come through from the Helcaraxe into Middle-earth. However, these forces were seen, and Fingon and his people attacked the orcs and drove them into the sea. This was not considered one of the battles of Beleriand because there weren't really many orcs and it wasn't much of a battle. However, this did cause Morgoth to realize that the orcs alone were no longer enough to defeat the elves, and he needed to create something even more powerful to join them. Another 100 years pass, and one night, Glaurung, one of the fire drakes of the north, the Uroloki dragons, comes from Angband. He snuck out in the night. He was young and only half of his grown size, but he decided he wanted to pick a fight. The elves that were stationed in the fields of Ardgalen fled before him. They'd never seen anything like this before, and he went about spitting flame and burning down all of the grasses in the fields that he could. However, Fingon, with his mighty cavalry, rode out to meet Glaurung. They were skilled archers, and because he was still young and not fully developed, their arrows were able to injure him. His scales did not offer enough protection, and so he was surrounded and driven back into Angband. The elves, however, did not really understand how much of a threat the Uriloki were going to be. They didn't know that Glaurung was just a baby compared to what he would be, and nobody at this point even knew that Glaurung was still going to be a baby compared to the greatest of the dragons that was still to come. So the elves celebrated this win, and Fingon was greatly, greatly praised for this. On Morgoth's side, however, he was furious with Glaurung for having snuck out like a bad teenager and revealed himself too soon. And Morgoth then knew he was going to have to wait, bide his time, and prepare for a great attack. At this point begins the 200 years called the Long Peace. And it's halfway in between this roughly that we're going to stop, because that's when the first men come on the scene. But what we should know about the Long Peace was that this was a great time of prosperity, growth, and riches for all of the elves in Beleriand. The entire area grew very rich. The Noldor built up their homes and strong defenses. Many things were created during this time: poetry, books of song and history and lore, jewelry, and physical artifacts. It was just a great period of growth. And many of the Noldor and Sindar merged into essentially one population. They spoke the same language, they lived together, but there were still key differences between these people that Tolkien tells us. The Noldor were stronger in body and mind. They were better craftsmen and sages, and they built using stone, and they loved hills and open land. The Sindar, on the other hand, had fairer voices, and were generally better at music, except for Maglor, second son of Feanor, who was widely renowned as one of the best singers of all time. But in general, the Sindar were just better singers. They loved the woods and the rivers, and many of them were still migratory. They just wandered around, singing and living in peace off the land. And it is at this point of peace and prosperity that I am going to stop today. Next week, we'll be talking about the first men to finally reach Beleriand. They essentially awoke in the east, and all this time have been traveling slowly across the land into the west. And it is Finrod Felagund who will first meet them. So I hope you'll join me next week when I talk about not only that meeting, but in general, the first men, how they awoke, and their family trees. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something, or you just like the way I told the story. Again, if you enjoy fairy tales, folk beliefs, mythologies, please take a look at my channel, Folksy Tales. And again, thank you. I will see you next week.